to talk about local government reform. It's really upon us. It's big, biggest since 1989. Really appreciate everyone coming out tonight to have your say to the panel. Great turnout, so much appreciated. A couple of wee housekeeping rules. Oh, by the way, my name's Andy Mackay, Geraldine Community Board, and I'm going to facilitate the proceedings for the evening. In the event of an emergency, we've got a fire escape here. If anyone needs to go to the toilet, the brown door over the far corner, help yourself. It's pretty open tonight. At any time after the introductions, please feel free to ask any questions, have any input on your thoughts. As you would have seen from what was in the courier last week, there's 5 options in here for amalgamations, different amalgamations and doing nothing. So the government basically deciding and telling everyone in this region what's going to happen. So if you've got different ideas, please come forward with them. Thank you very much for attending. I would like to introduce our panel for tonight, starting with CEO for Timaru District Council, Nigel Traynor, our local Mayor, Nigel Bowen. Welcome, Nigels. Greg Anderson, who's on the National Board for Federated Farmers. Welcome, Greg. Angie Blair, who's just been roped in right at the last minute. Excellent effort, Ange, and thank you very much. Welcome, Ange, from Geraldine.nz, and William Rolliston from South Pacific Serum Business in Timaru and Blue Cliff Station as well. So thank you very much for coming out to Geraldine to be part of this session. It's much appreciated. Without any further ado, I'd like to ask Mayor Nigel to open up with a few background comments on local government reform, how it's looking going forward and where we're at now. Welcome, Nigel.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy, and thanks for agreeing to facilitate tonight. Look, welcome everyone. Great to have you all with us. Great to see a great turnout. You've smashed it compared to Timaru, so great to see it's alive and well in Geraldine. Genuinely thank you for that. Now I'm going to rattle through a little bit, and I'm just going to assume that you don't sort of have full knowledge. I'll just introduce where we've come from and where we are today, and then Nige Traynor will talk through some of the numbers, which will be insightful. So government announced simplifying local government reforms. That was back in November. For those that remember, originally it was replacing regional councillors with committees that involved mayors, and they were going to lead that redesigning of local government, for the future of the country and specifically, obviously, for us, for Canterbury. That consultation received about 1,000 submissions, and on the back of that, they decided to make some changes, and the iteration that was we received in May, which is what we're currently working through, was where they got to. So the revised government approach announced includes the Head Start pathway. So that's for councils wishing to progress reforms earlier. And so about just when this landed about 3 months ago, I was at a national, rural and provincial council meeting. So basically councils under sort of 80,000 across New Zealand. So about 50 odd councils. At that point in time, about 43% of those that were there thought that they would go through the Head Start proposal. So almost 60% were looking at backstop, which I'll talk to in a minute. I now expect the majority of councils to be involved in the Head Start process. So the objective remains to move towards larger unitary councils, combining regional and territorial council functions into one single organisation. So while you've got centralisation happening, councils getting amalgamated into larger unitary entities, you've also got decentralisation occurring at the same time. So those functions that are managed by Environment Canterbury at the moment would then be managed by the smaller unitaries sitting under that. Some of the key things that the government put forward at that time was around reducing duplication, simplify governance structures, and improve accountabilities to communities. So councils wishing to participate have to put forward something by the 9th of August. So we've had a really tight turnaround. Back in December, we had this discussion with our current elected members, and there's very much a feeling in the room that actually this was a positive thing and it needed to be a change. And the approach that elected members took, and at the time we had three new elected members that had only been in those roles for 3 months, but we had a conversation. And the reality is, if we amalgamate in some shape or form, we've currently got 10 elected members with the councils only, and they were quite real to the fact that there's only going to be probably 4, maybe 5 elected members at a councillor level in a new entity. But our council has very much been up for it because we do see it as an opportunity. Some challenges sitting in there, but we do see it as an opportunity. So we've got till the 9th of August to put something forward. If we don't do that, and so those changes out is if we don't get this right, a default position and understanding the ministers that sit in Cabinet over this. One's from Auckland and the other is Minister Bishop, who is very unhappy with Wellington councils. So what we've got to balance up in our proposal is what we're putting forward versus another, what's another option? Another option for the government could be all of Canterbury. What does that look like for our region if we're all of Canterbury? So that's some of the sort of considerations we have to take into this. So regardless of the pathway, the government's direction is clear. Regional councils are expected to be removed by 2028. All regions will transition to larger unitary councils. So I'm expecting instead of 78 current councils, you've got 67 TAs and 13 regionals, I think, roughly. It would be roughly, probably under 20 councils across the country. So we've been working at a mayoral forum level as well, having conversations across districts and trying to get willing partners, if you like. So certainly at the moment, South Canterbury's very willing to work together, as you would naturally assume. Waitaki recently have said that they would their preference was to move north, and then Ashburton, the other one that we're consulting on with the community, have still yet to make those decisions. But one of the options that sit in that is joining with South Canterbury. I guess before I just pass to Nigel for more focus on some of the numbers, which people will be concerned about, is my view. This is, and we've been in the current iteration of local government for 37 years now. I'm sure some in the room through the Q&A will be able to tell us about that, and we'll have insights from that time for smaller communities, which will be of value. But you don't get these opportunities. They don't come around very often. I think we're designing something now for the next 30, 50 years. You've got to be thinking long term. So it's probably not okay to think about, well, hey, Waitaki at the moment has a large rate increase. That's a moment in time. If you think of actually that 30, 50-year outlook, what is the appropriate model that best serves? And the biggest challenge for us through this will actually be getting a democratic model that really serves small communities well. Because if you look across those 5 councils, you've got a lot of small communities, Geraldine just being one of those. And so that's the opportunity potentially to design something that better serves our community. So I'll pass now to Nigel.
I'm Nigel Trainer. I've got the boring part, which is talking about numbers and finances. So if you want a wee kip, you can do that right now. What I've done is I've looked at the 24-25 audited accounts of these 5 councils, and I've also pulled them together as one. And what it tells us is that at the moment for those 5 councils, it would be 200 in 24-25, it would be 220 million of rates going into that entity, and that would have been 56% of their total revenue, which would have been 392 million of revenue. And the revenue comes from a number of different sources, being rates, fees and charges. There are quite a number of subsidies and grants, particularly coming from NZTA and the likes of other government agencies. Development and financial contributions, financial revenue from investments that we have, and then other revenue. And some of that other revenue is actually vested assets that we have. And depending on what's going on in that particular district, that number will fluctuate up and down depending on what development is happening. On the flip side, when you look at each of the 5 of them, 1, 2, 3 of those 5 ran deficits in 24-25, and they were Timaru, 5.6 million deficit in 24-25, Mackenzie, $4.8 million deficit in 24-25, Waimate ran a small surplus of 1.4, Ashburton ran a surplus of 8.3, and Waitaki ran a surplus of 2.6. And then when you look at that as a percentage of their revenue, we're at 4.1%, Mackenzie 15.6%, and this is just the deficits, and Waitaki 2.9%. So when we think about Waitaki, actually of the 5 that were on that particular year, they were third best. Okay. Then when you start looking at personnel costs, the personnel costs for those 5 were all within a band of the rates, and they were the lowest at 21% through to 23% to 25%. So Timaru was 23%, 21% for Mackenzie, 25% at Waimate. So obviously they've got more going on in house, and possibly because they're smaller. Ashburn and Waitaki both at 21%. Then when you looked at their other expenses as a percentage of their revenue, TDC was at 42%, Mackenzie 63%. Now that potentially is because of staffing issues or looking for consultants to do work for them, who knows. Waimate 41%, Ashburton 40%, and Waitaki 49%. The finance costs were all within a margin as well. They range from 7%, 4%, 1%, 5%, and 4%, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And then there's depreciation, and depreciation was all within a band ranging from 22% right through to 28%. So you can see that the depreciation is quite similar right across. When we hear a lot of noise about, well, when we think about poor old Waitaki with their deficit, that's a deficit. It's not debt, okay? So they were running a deficit, and it could be for a whole heap of reasons. What I discovered when I came to local government is that there are quirks every year. If your subsidies and grants drop, you could actually end up with a deficit because you're relying on that revenue. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but when you think about 24-25, they had a very small deficit, and suddenly they're ballooning out, and someone needs to understand when we actually, if we go through a merger with them, we've got to really understand what's going on down there. However, deficit is one thing, the debt that we hold is a different thing. So when you look at the 10 councils across Canterbury, the most indebted council is Christchurch City Council, and there's good reason for that in terms of their size and also what they've been going through with earthquakes and so forth. Number 2 is Timaru, with the second largest debt holding. Number 3 is Huranui, which is quite a small council. 4 is Ashburton. 5, Selwyn. 6 is Waimak. 7 is Waitaki. Waitaki's debt is quite low. It's only 100. Well, it's 74 million. Okay, ours is hitting up towards 250 million. Number 8 is Mackenzie. Number 9 is Kaikoura, and number 10 is Waimeri. So when we're looking at the potential partners we might be merging with, 3 of the lowest, 10, 8 and 7 would be our partners. And when you start looking at that, actually it creates an entity that actually has quite medium-sized debt. When you bring those all 5 together, they would have run in 24-25, all 5 of those were together, they would have ran a deficit of 3.4 million, and there would have been 0.8% of their revenue, which when you're thinking about organisations that are there to break even, that is actually quite close to being break even. And if you were doing a merger, we had a quick look at just the SLTs alone, the executive teams, 8.6 million across those 5 in salaries for the SLTs. If you can't get those down to just over 2 million, there's potentially a 6 million saving there just done. We know that even the governance across the 5 would be 2.5 million. With one governance entity, you would bring a couple million out of there. So just in those 2 lines alone, you potentially could actually save somewhere around $8 million. There could be, when you start looking under the bonnet, there might be other things that you've got to lift up, but there might be other things that will also come down. Think about computer systems. Waitaki and Timaru basically have the same systems. If you pull them together, you would have savings. We know you would have savings. So effectively, there needs to be a really strong view put on whatever it looks like in terms of the structure going under it. But I think the numbers actually are telling us a story that it's doable from a financial point of view, but the design is actually more around the democracy, the structure for governance, and for hearing the local voice. And I think that that's where we've got to put our focus in terms of this this new entity, if we choose to go down that path, rather than the numbers. Because I think I'm absolutely confident the numbers will take care of themselves pretty quick.
Just a couple of quick comments. One thing that we don't know yet is the level of subsidy from Greater Christchurch. They have a significant urban population. So just if you look at rivers as an example, rivers are funded through general rates, which is about 65%, I think. There's targeted rates, and there's grants from government as well. So we do have to unpick a few things and understand both top-down, pulling ECAN apart, but also bottom-up, understanding that there is enough money in the system to be able to run those functions without that heavy subsidy that we do get from some of those Greater Christchurch ratepayers. And just one other point I just want to make is government has said that for most regions they want one proposal. They've said with Canterbury and Waikato, because they're bigger, more diverse land areas, 10 councils roughly in each, that they expect, and they've mentioned it in the cabinet paper, no more than 3. So what we've got to be careful, and this is the challenge when we're working with potential partners across boundaries, is what does 3 look like? If it's 3, does it become 4? Does it become 5? If it's 5, is it too fragmented and then we just go into backstop, and the risk of that then government making the decisions for us. So although we put up as options, we'll put up the 5 options, we'll put up the 3 councils, the 4 councils, and then the 5 councils, and then the 2 other options. Actually, probably South Canterbury is not an option that we would put through if we were not wanting to go into backstop. Bearing in mind that I expect a lot of our public will naturally feedback in that South Canterbury makes sense to them, but from a governance point of view, a government point of view, I don't believe that's going to be acceptable.
So the entity we're starting to look at is Tasman. Tasman is a unitary. And when you start looking at Tasman in terms of the unitary functions, they seem to do quite well.
Right, thank you for that financial analysis there, Nigel. I think it goes to show the importance that a snapshot in time doesn't represent the full picture
exactly.
of where district council is. So I think that was summed up very nicely. And thank you, Mayor Nigel, for some historical context around that. Just while you guys are thinking up your questions, I have one question to put to the panel. As individually you can comment on that, and is how will amalgamation make things look better for our region? William?
Well, I think we've been given some pretty narrow parameters by our first two speakers in terms of what the options are. But I think what would look good if we have to go through amalgamation. What would look good? I think the key things for me is that we have an operation that is more effective, more fit for purpose, potentially more efficient, although, listening to Nigel, big councils and small councils seem to spend the same on their personnel, etc. So I'm just going to leave that efficiency bit to the side. I think effectiveness is more important. But I think critically, a good outcome is going to be where people retain their sense of community. And I think that's probably the most important thing. And I think it's a reflection of the fact that not many people turned up in Timaru and a lot more people turned up here tonight. If I go by population, then Christchurch will probably have about 3 people turning up to their meeting. So those are the things, fit for purpose and communities, retaining and enhancing their sense of community.
Thank you, William. Ange?
Yeah. For me, much the same as William. I think that Geraldine is an incredible community, and we've got a massive diversity of economic value within our community, as well as a massive diversity of people. So for me, the main thing that I can see out of this is we get an opportunity to reform our democratic body. And I would like to see that be really, really concrete and really, really strong, so that we've got really good communication channels that we can go to, which potentially some of you will agree that we don't currently always have. In Geraldine, we've got, I think, close to 60% of the Timaru district area, and one councillor who does a fantastic job, Philip. But it would be great to have some more robust democratic bodies locally, for sure.
I'll probably say the same as I said on Tuesday night. I just hope that that local communities can get their confidence back in local government, because it has been lost. There's no doubt. You go around the country and all communities now are saying how it's not they don't trust their local councils, but they've lost confidence in them. So hopefully that we can get better confidence back from the new entity.
Thanks, Greg, and probably similar for me from the other day also. So one of the frustrating things that I see in the time that I've been in this role, all of what is being mandated now, we could have done ourselves. It's in legislation. We can work with other councils. My biggest frustration at a local level, but also at a Canterbury Mural Forum level, and I give this relatively easy example, is that we could have one joint building control authority. We currently, across South Canterbury, have 3. Same legislation, 3 different sets of rules, same builders working across boundary with slightly different rule books. So does that make any sense? I look at this and go, we can do this a whole lot better for business. And then the other element, and it's been well articulated around communities and local voice, and 100% agree with you. My entire time in this role has been dealing with reform from central government, and I feel that we miss that connection with community. But I also think on the back of this, there's changes being made, and it's around the regional council's function. So don't forget that. And I think there's probably a feeling from rural Canterbury that urban voice in Christchurch has been too strong across rural policy. So what I want through this is that rural voice doesn't actually get lost, and we can put something up quite bespoke that allows farmers to have real input on policy that affects their businesses. So that's the opportunity that I see.
I think that the trick in this is actually how we design it, and how do we actually get that representation right, and also take the advantage of efficient scale that we could actually create. And when you think about it, if the 5 councils came together, we'd have 125,000 people, but we'd have 57% of the Canterbury landmass. And the trick needs to be is how do you cover both? I also think that we do a lot of work in local government, I think needs to be rethought and looked at differently. Well, think about our long-term plans, okay? At the moment, there's 5 long-term plans for those 5 councils. Just to audit those long-term plans, it's about $300,000 to $350,000 per plan. That's $1.75 million just to audit our 5 long-term plans. Now, if you get the 5 of them and you've got 1 long-term plan, it'll still be $350,000, because auditors work at a materiality level, not at any other level. So there's things there that we've got to get smarter at. But again, it's in the design of how do you make sure that people like towns like Geraldine can be heard. Simple as that.
Right, thank you for your feedback there, guys. Much appreciated. Now, I know there's some great questions sitting out in the audience. They would like to open up with a good question.
The nuts and bolts question. What is the geographic boundary of Waitaki?
It goes from the Waitaki River, just south of Waitaki. No, Waitaki River, south, right through to Palmerston and out to...
From the coast to, is it the Divide or where?
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
We're also live streaming here, guys. Do we want questions to come up here? Otherwise, we have a runner here at Bobby Cliff. We'll run the mic. Jimmy, you have a question down the back. Grab the mic and get them together back here.
Yeah, Jimmy Emmett, Federated Farmers. What a great turnout, guys. Congratulations. I watched it on, I was a nerd and watched it on TV the other night. Just thank you, me and Nigel, for acknowledging the rural community here. I've been sitting here feverishly writing down, but currently in the ECAN geographical land space, we are 60% or nearly 6%, which tells us we are a rural economy. We only have 2 councillors based on population. We all get that. So being that powerful rural economy in that rural region, what assurance can be given to rural communities like Geraldine that any decision making, especially around consents and the ability to farm day to day, won't be consumed by bureaucratic red tape and idealism? And can you give assurances that only elected members will be part of any new authority, unlike unelected representatives like currently sit on ECAN at the moment, that just they're unelected, they're uneducated, they have agendas? So what assurance can you give that any new entity will only be based on elected members? Sorry, there's a bit in there.
So I'm assuming this is just a question fed to fed, is it? Is this?
No.
Oh, is it to me? Oh.
He's a plant.
I think that's yours, Mayor Nigel.
No, thanks, Jimmy. Firstly, yeah, and with the current ECAN council makeup, we actually had to fight really hard with Greg and the 3 mayors across South Canterbury. Were up in Christchurch together submitting to ECAN to be able to keep that extra, because we were going to go down to 1. And so that's the future challenge with this when you bring bigger entities together, because sitting in that you still do have very much a population-based representation model. And so for smaller communities, we're going to have to ask for exemptions, be creative around wards, those sorts of things. So I don't have all the answers, Jimmy, tonight on the rule, but I think that's a really key part of the design, and whether it's something that we put in around statutory advisory committee, but that there's definitely rural voice on it. And so what we've got to be careful, and there's a bit of a theme from central government at the moment, and I know you're talking about unelected, but we've got to get a model where we get, like, how do we mandate that we have that rural voice, whether it's a feds rep or, I don't have the answer, but how do you get that thinking around having that voice at the table? Is it just specifically rural elected? Because you can't guarantee that you'll get a farmer as an example. So we've got to be quite smart in how we put that together, and I don't know whether it's at the first design phase or it's within a committee structure. And that sort of talks also to your point around, non-elected, elected. At the moment there's a bit of debate around that. We've got non-elected independent chair on our audit and risk committee. That's really beneficial, and I think they're putting in legislation some exemptions around some of those sort of key things. So we've just got to balance when you have, or how you use, at what level, elected, unelected. I know I haven't answered your questions fully, but I actually don't think it's just for me to design that new model, because I'm not a farmer. So I'd actually like the rural community to help design that for us, and that's why you guys should be at the table.
Can I just add something? And Jimmy, since you looked at feed on Tuesday, I can't remember who it was that brought up the idea of an electoral college.
It was me, William.
That was you, yeah. So I thought about that over the last couple of days, and I think that's something we should be thinking about, because we have to try and. I think one of the problems that we've got with local government, and this was articulated the other day, is that we set this council up, and we want them to do everything. We want them to understand everything. We want the same. We don't necessarily want, but we get the same model for every problem. And I don't think that's actually the answer, because if you look at catchments, for example, in my view, better than having centralised, ECAN and Christchurch is actually to go from the bottom up with catchment groups. And when we looked at what ECAN did when they were commissioners, and we were going through Plan Change 3 in coastal South Canterbury, we were having meetings probably every couple of weeks in terms of public consultation. Never had so much consultation before the plan came out. This wasn't we still went through the process, the statutory process, but the officials and the scientists and everyone came down, talked to the farmers, talked to the people who cared about the environment, talked to people who cared about human health, and everybody got together and talked about that. That was, to me, that's a really good model for something like water. But if you're looking at something like roading, you don't want to have that sort of system for roading. You want to have a much more top-down, bring the resources together from the whole region, and do a much more top-down thing, because you can put resources, urgently where they're needed, etc. So I think we need to think quite broadly about how we can address the various functions that local government needs to address, and we can do that. We've got the opportunity to do that in different ways. So I'd just like everyone to think more broadly than just an elected council at the top, and they make all the decisions that flow down. It might be that we have a electoral college that all the regions put together. And I think actually one of the early ideas was that the mayors were going to get together and appoint the regional council or something like that. But those sort of models, I think we need to be open to. I'm not giving any preference, just trying to throw ideas out there.
Greg, would you like to make any comments around that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the big thing is around this democracy on how we're going to be representative. So it's going to take some real good thinking outside the square, because I can't see any way that you're going to be fairly represented in the Twisels, the Feelies, the Geraldines. You might have half a point of say. There's going to be, if we go with Ashburton, there's going to be 5 councillors from Ashburton, there might be 4 from Timaru. And if that's how the elected decisions are made, you're going to have harder, and they can put it around community boards. But what worries me about community boards is all of a sudden you're going to have a whole lot more backroom staff, support staff, and we're not going to achieve anything in scales of efficiency. So maybe a way is just that we have some really community-minded people who put the right people in charge of these parts of the new entity. Because I mean, at the end of the day, and I made this comment the other day, myself and Nigel, CEO, disagreed a wee bit, but let's be honest, we've got some great councillors in South Canterbury, but around the country, some of these councillors couldn't run a bath, let alone a $10.5 billion enterprises, which what we will be if we combine with Ashburton.
Good point there, Greg. Thank you. And I guess that's the challenge. It's getting, grassroots representation. Malcolm Crowding at Mesopotamia, how does he get his message up to the top level? So that's what it's all about. Question, Lee, we'll get the speaker a microphone there for Lee.
No, because you can't hear it on the internet. That's the problem.
I'm just wondering, is the government intending to change the Local Government Act? Because at the moment it's based purely on population.
Yeah.
And Geraldine District does know what it's like to have a larger population area, because we have the same with Timaru as opposed out here at Geraldine, so we do understand all that. So that's one issue I have. You've got to have that thing, but this idea that you have very few councillors and still say a council of big area with 12 councillors. I mean, are you telling me Auckland has 12 councillors? I thought they had about 26 sitting around their table or something. And I do know well, that's good. That's lucky for them. I know in Auckland, it hasn't really made any savings whatsoever. So that's one thing. And the other thing, you're talking about running things. No, thank you. It's actually distracting.
No, we need it.
We'll put it down there. The catchment board did a very good job of running the rivers and things prior to 1989. So maybe you need to look back at some of those things that did work before the Labor government came along and buggered it all up.
Yeah, I can kick if you like. So you sort of your last point sort of first. Yeah, I think there's an opportunity, maybe something. I think it needs to be statutory around that rural and catchments sort of committee type approach, and that sort of probably ties back to your first point: is will they change the Local Government Act? Yes, they have to, and so that's the opportunity in our Head Start proposals to be able to talk to all those points that we want changed. I think the big challenge though will be on that population based. We've got to request it. I think that will be we need councils across the country to be speaking with the same voice to be able to get those changes. Otherwise, if it's just one group, I think it'll be harder. But I agree. I think it needs to be changed.
Lee's quite correct.
Yeah, it's with
Good. I'm an ex-Waitaki councillor. 40 years ago, all that happened, and the whole amalgamation was a disaster because in that organisation there was a bankrupt county council, a borough with a lot of money, and other councils that were just ticking along. So you're looking at a very difficult job, and the biggest thing I feel is that the government isn't being fair on any councils, and this is going back 40 years they weren't. They not fronting up with the money, they're giving you all the work and no income. And the ratepayers, in my view, just cannot keep paying. So this amalgamation will be great. I haven't really looked into it too much. But I was on the catchment board and rabbit boards and a few things like that. So we have to have local input from the farmers or the local people. And quite right what he said about Geraldine. It's a fantastic place. I retired from a Marama to live here, and you couldn't have got a nicer place than Geraldine.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the in the Kickstart program or Head Start program, whatever they call it, I've got 5 categories they want to see us achieve to go under, and the second one's simplifying local government. Well, I mean, as I said the other night, how long is a piece of string? But the real problem is with local government is that the government has just made it larger and larger. There's got to be some simple core responsibilities that local government has in charge, and it should be mandated that we can't go off on some tangents elsewhere. I mean, you know, that's what's, and like the money's not coming down. I think in 1989, you might be able to say there was a lot of talk about a lot of grants coming, but those grants have all disappeared. So, and I've always made the statement, and I just heard this plenty of times, the taxpayer and the ratepayer are the same people. So why not have it come from taxes instead of rates, which are based quite often, as you know, in the rural community, on land value, which isn't related to ability to pay.
Anyone else like to comment on Mike's question there? It's a good question, Mike. Another question from the floor.
So, hi.
We might have the microphone.
I've got one here.
Des has got it.
Oh, thanks.
So my question's just around, it's one thing to look at the budgets and see how each of those councils are tracking. What has the infrastructure been maintained like in each of those places you're looking at joining with? At the end of the day, you can have a really good budget, but it's because you haven't spent the money where it's needed to be spent. And the other priority from my point of view, being a rural community, there's also businesses in our rural town. At the end of the day, we want the farming community to be thriving and represented, but also the businesses that are in these small towns need to be doing well for our people to be doing well. And for that, we need to be represented somewhere.
I've only been in local government for 2.5 years, and a number of decades back we moved away from cash accounting to accrual accounting, if people understand that. And I'm still gobsmacked that we don't depreciate all our assets, and by not depreciating your assets, you're not being honest about the replacement of those assets. And I think that those are the sorts of lessons that are going to be pulled through into the new entity to make sure that the money is there to replace them. I think you'll find that no matter which council you look at, they'll all have a varying degree of infrastructure problems. And that infrastructure, that will have to be part of the design in terms of what exactly we've got. Now, infrastructure, particularly water, that we lay that for 50 to 100 years. And but what we do is we don't provision for it like it is a long-term asset. We actually look at it as a short-term asset. And we've got to get smarter at that in terms of understanding what we've got and how we go about provisioning for the replacement of it.
I mean, from my point of view, I'm not particularly worried about the numbers, because I think I'm not going to say that they're going to be sorted out, but it's possible to sort them out. If you've got a council who's got not many assets and one who's got a lot of assets, then things can change. Things can be worked out from that point of view. I think what we really want to be thinking about in this sort of meeting is what is the council, what is the structure, and what is 30 years going to look like, so that we're actually not sitting here going through the same process because that didn't work. How are we gonna make it so that it's something we want to have for a long time because it's working really well, and that is about representation. But as I said before, I think it's and I don't think making local government simpler is actually the answer. I think that's been the problem. We're always trying to make it too simple, and different problems require different approaches, and I think we need to try and think about that.
We might grab a question from.
Hi, I lived in the UK for a long time, and I've seen councils merge, demerge. They're talking about merger again, and it's the national government that's forcing it through. And I've seen no savings at all. It's just been like Auckland. The costs have gone up, the services have gone down, the council staff seem to have increased for no benefit whatsoever. And I'm just wondering, I really hope that this new council that's set up has sort of guidelines for costs, staffing, services, so we're not hurt by it like Auckland has been. And I really do not want to see a brand new council building built in the centre of this new entity just to fall empty again in like 30 years, which is what's happening in the UK. So hopefully I don't see a white elephant. Thank you.
I think the trick is treating the council like a business. If you treat it as a business and you understand your revenue streams and you understand your costs, then you should be perfectly fine. And I would suggest that. Sorry?
Talking about people.
No, I'm talking about the revenue and costs.
You've got to bring the people into it.
Of course you do. But you've also got to make sure that you've got the right number of people to do the work that's required.
I think sort of sitting in behind this too is there is some, legislation changes. We've got RM reform, which, is the catalyst for local government reform. Effectively, you're taking out regional council because they're not going to have the same functions to perform. Also, there has been, what's the act called as far as the amendments, the simplifying, but it's just gone through. So government has defined what core is. In all reality, all of what we do now pretty much is core. I think it might be populist politics. The other thing that is coming in 29, and this is why I throw caution to councils that we don't rush to the bottom around rates, is that you've got rates capping currently coming in 29. I think if there's a change of government, it's still going to come in because, when any government mentions or party mentions rates capping, they get the polls go up. So that's going to come in. So there's some things that are forcing us in that direction as far as those cost controls anyway. However, they have exempted the likes of water, and so they should. But water, you'll have water rates sitting off to the side, which will be over that 4% threshold. So if you put those back together, you're actually going to end up with similar costs than what you had anyway. But that water investment does for the next 20, 30 years. This is, the one that's going to follow that is bridges. We're the proud owner on your behalf of 306, bridges and culverts, which are all, coming to the end of life. So there's a massive infrastructure challenge that sits out there that we have to fund somehow. So some, big challenges sitting out there.
For sure, great questions. We've got up front, Tom.
Thank you. Nice leeway, Nigel. There is RMA reform. There is changes in function of the regional council, but there's a lot of mention about territorial things tonight, but not about the regional functions. One of the beauties of the regional council has been that we've had control of all of the rivers within Canterbury, and that's really important. And so you've really got to be catchment based. So I'm just interested in what the panel is thinking about. How do we take those functions of the regional council, biosecurity, river management, and then there's a whole lot of issues that have already been mentioned by farmers, by businessmen, by environmentalists, because they all want to have a voice in how we run those rivers and how they affect the land use. I mean, we're in one of the most prosperous parts of Canterbury. And the other thing is just, I wonder whether we need a bigger unitary authority so we've actually got a voice with government. If we end up with a whole lot of little people, we're not going to have that voice. And if government seems to think they're going to take more environmental control, then actually there's more reason for larger entities to get a voice. I'd be interested in comments.
No worries.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, good question.
So Tom, you're talking about an all of Canterbury unitary authority.
That might be a stretch too far, but
Yeah, I mean, if it were affordable, I think my option would be a South Canterbury Unitary Authority, but it's not. Well, it doesn't appear to be. And if you do that, what do you do? North and south. So I think South Canterbury is going to be the core, and Ashburton and Waitaki will either come in or not come in. But it doesn't make any sense to be any smaller than that.
But to get your catchments, you really need to be Waitaki to the
So I don't actually, what happens in my catchment in the Otago and South Canterbury is got no relevance to what's happening in the Hinds. And I think actually that we could consider managing our large rivers. So the Waitaki, the Rangitata, the Rakaia, the WIMAC, maybe differently to the smaller catchments that are there, because they behave differently anyway. You know, they move across different land. They, you know, if you look at the catchment of the Rangitata, you know, it's quite broad in the mountains, but it's actually quite narrow on the plains, because all the water runs down into the small streams. So I think we could be quite clever in terms of how you manage those big catchments, and that would get away from in terms of territorial margins, boundaries, where the river makes sense for everything except for water. It would get you away from that. You could put the boundary down there. So something worth thinking about. You know, somebody mentioned about a water commission that actually ran those big rivers. That's a possibility.
I think it's really hard to even go in this discussion, because I think what you're saying is important, Tom. But the problem is, we need, like, these guys need to know, the leadership of all these councils need to know the actual figures, and you've probably got insight to the figures, but we need to know what it costs to run these rivers within each region. There's obviously a budget somewhere in that palace in Christchurch that says what it costs around the Rangitata, what it costs around the Rakai, and then there'll be the small catchments, which William's point, is far better run by local communities.
I guess one of the things that you're talking about, the actual cost of running the catchment of the river.
Yep.
They're actually really important for the water that comes out of the river, that provides irrigation,
Yep.
and, right, you know, the nutrient management that we need to do. There's a whole lot of other functions that are so important on a catchment-wide basis. And so, you know, like that's why I think the catchments, whether it's a small catchment or a big catchment, has to be managed on a whole, but hopefully from the bottom up rather than the top down. But you need a strong voice, otherwise government will dictate what happens.
Yeah, but if you take that analogy right to the end, then you just make the whole of New Zealand a unitary authority, or at least the South Island. So, you know, what if you dug a tunnel under the Alps and ran water? You know, but I would consider that if you're taking water out of the Rangitata, you've taken water out of the Rangitata, you've taken it out of that catchment. If it goes into a different catchment, then that catchment has to manage that water. The trade between those two things are, you know, are one thing. But once that trade's been made, then you've got X amount of water in one catchment and you've got Y amount of water in another. I don't see that that's a problem.
I think I'm just going to do my shirt up because this is with my farmer hat on, not my one. But I think what we've got at the moment is a 900-person massive unit trying to look after our rivers, and they have got a lot of science and not a lot of common sense quite often. And I think as farmers that we need to get back to a balanced act where bridges aren't getting flooded out because diggers weren't allowed to go in and clear them, and our native and endangered creatures aren't getting damaged because farmers can go willy-nilly and take shingle. There's got to be a middle road, and I think that is on a river-by-river basis. So as long as we get the north and the south side of the river, we should be fine.
I think, Tom, your point about like sort of irrigation and the economic value from these catchments, I think like the Ashburton down to Waitaki is a pretty strong voice in government because of the hydro power that comes out of South Kent, comes out of the Waitaki scheme. You've got a fair bit of clout in Wellington or in New Zealand society about how we dictate some of the way forward. Because I get a bit worried your comment. It's a bit like the Texan that didn't want to be the biggest farmer, but he wanted to own his neighbour. Never stops.
But I think that is in some of the detail which we have to work through. And catchment's one thing, but I think, William, you talked about the science function last time on Tuesday on how that's run. So, you know, there's things that could be still at a Canterbury-wide level. If you end up with 3 unitary councils, it's actually a lot easier to work in partnership than with 11. And so you could have that function managed at a Canterbury level still. And then science is an interesting one, and I won't jump into William's field, but you'll have a bit of perspective potentially on requirements there.
Well, I'd like to come back to the gentleman who's been on the catchment board, because I'm just old enough to remember catchment boards, and I wasn't old enough to be on one, though, I might add. But I think the thing I saw in catchment boards was that the local officer knew the river. He knew all the people up the river, or he or she. It was generally a he in those days. And so you got really good understanding between the landowners, the users of the river, and a good connection back to the catchment board who's needing to manage the river. And I think we've lost a lot of that with Environment Canterbury, and that's why I think that catchments and working from catchments up, and we're starting to form catchment groups, which are great, is a really good focus to start to manage some of those environmental issues that are still bubbling along there that we need to deal with.
Yeah, thank you. You're quite right. Yeah, I lived on a braided river for 50 years farming it, and I was on the catchment board for 10 years. We agree with everything. There was local people. I knew every ratepayer on that Waitaki River, right from the coast to the Mount Cook area and up to Tekapa and Pukaki. We've lost that with bureaucrats doing all this work. The councillors need to get off their A's and get out there and find out what is actually going on. The councillors are, sorry, councillors, you're quite at fault that you've lost the ability to communicate about these issues and allowed bureaucrats who are very, very poor at a lot of issues, and I can go into an issue on the Orari River, but you've got to do some more hard work. And catchment boards work well, and some councils work well. When I was on a council, it was bloody hard work, and that's what you guys have got ahead of you. A lot of hard work.
Yeah, but I think if we're starting to really amalgamate, you're just not going to have that access to councillors. That's why we need to think of a different model. And I think the catchment groups that are developing are actually, in terms of catchments, are a really good model because people with skin in the game are helping to make those decisions. And I mentioned on Tuesday that we pay a targeted rate for flood protection, and what happens is we put the money in, it goes up to Christchurch. The good people of Christchurch double it or whatever and send it back to us as a local committee. We then make recommendations, and our recommendations, I think 99.99% of the time, are enacted by the regional council. And this is one of the things, we're going to get more representation in terms of because we're getting decentralisation of regional council functions, but actually we're going to lose a huge chunk of money that's coming out of the ratepayers of Christchurch, and how we actually deal with that. And that's why there's a little bit of frustration. We don't know what the sums are for Environment Canterbury, but we need to hope that we're going to be able to do that. And Tasman, as an example, being able to cope with a smaller ratepayer base to run a unitary authority. But having that representation, having those local catchment committees, then having democracy going up, I think is really appropriate in what's a really important environmental issue.
To be fair to Tom's point, and not to be negative, I mean, back when the catchment boards were going, all you really did was river maintenance, river management. Now we've got this beast that was brought in 1889 called the Resource Management Act, which sets national policy statements, which drives regional policy statements, which has been the bane of our society for the last 30 odd years, because it was probably a good bit of legislation when it came in, because it's growing so big. You're doing a lot more than worrying about river management. You've got to have, there's nitrate levels, there's E. coli, there's all these other things. That's a lot of pressure put on a small groups. And Tom's point, you do need a lot of science in behind that and a lot of knowledge and grunt to.
So if you take the analogy of the flood protection, you could do the same for nitrates. So if you've got a river that's got high nitrates, you then have a targeted rate. It's then subsidised by the general rating base, and that group then decides what's going to be done. So if you're going to put a wetland on Joe Bloggs' farm because it's going to reduce the nitrate levels, then you do that, and that helps pay for that. And if that drops the nitrate levels, then your targeted rate drops as well. So there are lots of different ways that we can think of how we can run these things.
Good comments around the board, nicely. We got a lot of water in the and it's got to be managed well. Shane, question.
Is it clear from central government what is being achieved or what problem is being solved by amalgamation? And the second part of that is, once the final amalgamation plan is put together and submitted, is there any sense of what the measure will be that's assessed by as to stickability? Does central government have a view of what's correct and what's not?
I can't speak for them, but I'd say no and no. But why I look past that is I still look at this and go, it's an opportunity that, and a lot of things should have been done. We shouldn't have had water reform before, local government reform. We should have done that all in the correct order. But it is an opportunity, and can we build a model that's better than what's sitting in there now?
I think that the Crown thinks that local government is inefficient. And I'm talking the whole spectrum, including the environment, the regional councils, and they've heard from ratepayers that they're sick of increased rates, so they want to do something about it, and this is their way of doing that.
I think the challenge, though, if those that were involved pre-89, is the model and the funding model was different. There was more government grants on water schemes and all sorts of things. We don't have any of that. We've got NZTA funding, but a lot of the other grant funding. So acknowledge that the model is still broken, and that's one of our challenges around change in land use, dairy trucks, all those sort of things on the road. We're going to have a massive roading network across whatever it ends up being, and how do we advocate for the appropriate funding from central government to make that work?
I think the government, and I'm not speaking for the government at all, but I think the government and both sides of the house think that councils next door to each other should be doing things together, and councils aren't doing things together. You saw Labor try and do the Three Waters to do just that, and their response to that is, well, if you're not going to coordinate together, we'll just put you together. You won't have any choice. I think that's the logic.
Nigel, has there been assurances from the government that being election year, that if there's a change of government, that this will still go ahead?
No, well, it's a question for the opposition. And so I had the spokesperson on stage. He's actually in Timaru on Saturday, so I'll ask him again on Saturday. And we did challenge them and say, hey, you've got to the 9th of August. It'd be great to see some, local government policy before then. I don't think we're going to see that. I look at the, two sides of the house and go, well, centralisation through the last government, Three Waters, Polytech, Health. They've, Tangi said to me, he said, oh, we're not going to force amalgamations. Well, hold on, they went through Three Waters, so you've already, been there. So I expect it might slow, but I still think this will be the end outcome, and I expect rates capping to come through, whether it changes either way. But that's just my opinion, yeah.
It's looking like it's locked and loaded to change, pretty much.
Yeah.
So can I ask Nigel, do you think rates capping is a better instrument than setting lower levels on borrowing?
I think they're completely different things.
Mm.
So effectively, you should be able to get your increased costs within the metrics that they're looking at, and they're particularly CPI. But the borrowing, you depreciate, the cash that you generate from your depreciation should pay for renewals, but they won't, because you know that the people game the depreciation through valuations and so forth. So therefore, there's never enough cash. So where's the delta met? And that's through borrowing. But you've got to make sure that you actually keep that depreciation up to speed, because there should be years where you're not using all of that money that's generated from depreciation to pay for capex, and that should then reduce your borrowing.
No, I just think rates capping is a ridiculous notion. I mean,
Yeah.
Your councils have got to spend what they've got to spend, and if you want them to spend less, then you make them spend more effectively, not just cap their rates.
The challenge is actually the funding model. I think we tax around 8% of the total tax take, which and provide for significant amount of the country's infrastructure, and about 90% of the money's controlled by Wellington. So that's one of the issues, and I don't have the answer on that one either, but it is a big problem.
Thank you. Dan.
Yeah, hi. Are we on? Yeah, thank you. I have one comment plus a comment and a question. The first bit is if you go to the 5 district councils being brought together, you would end up with 2.5 of the big alpine rivers as opposed to 2 halves plus 1. And that seems like a good outcome to me. The other thing that's a comment and a question is we've heard a fair amount about cash and population numbers, but communities of interest is a very important aspect to what we're doing here. And whether you go for the 3, the 4 or the 5, I do think you have a decent community of interest. It's got to be a good thing, makes life easier. Yeah. So if you have any comments to make around that, any answers to that, it's not really a question, is it? But I'd like to know what you think.
Well, it's interesting that these guys have put forward the option of sneaking the boundary out to take the Rakaia and then sort of having a deviated line down south, not taking the whole of Waitaki. But I mean, like, I think you did right. We are, Ashburton down to Waitaki is a community of interest. We're basically the same drivers, rural and tourism. And I think, personally, I like the idea of just South Canterbury, but it sounds like it's not going to stack up. But I mean, sometimes if it does stack up, maybe the community's got to fight for that. I don't know. I know in the median and fairly there, a lot of them were pushing towards just South Canterbury. But obviously that doesn't sound like it's a goer. I mean, I heard tonight or this afternoon that it sounds like Kaikoura is going to go with Marlborough. So all of a sudden that makes it difficult for the North Canterbury. Is the government going to accept Huranui and Waimak is big enough? And then you've got the explosion of Christchurch. I mean, Christchurch is going to spread right out into Rolleston, Selwyn. It's going to be one big city one day. So, and we've got to be careful we don't get left in a position where we just get pushed in with them one day. Our grandchildren get pushed in with them anyway. So that didn't answer the question, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think this general view that Christchurch and Rolleston and Lincoln, Banks Peninsula are all going to be one unitary authority. It's how you divide up the rest. That's going to be the question. And it occurred to me that if we've got one mayor across all of that time, or all of that space, then the only thing the mayor's going to be doing is anointing new citizens, because they have so many. They have so many citizen ceremonies to do that's all they'll be doing. So and it does come back to that sense of identity. I mean, do we have one mayor for that whole region, or actually do we have several mayors for that region, but they're more presidents than prime ministers? So a much more ceremonial role. I mean, that's something we could think of as well.
It's interesting, William. I don't know if the New Zealand Initiative put out a report. You didn't read that one, any chance?
No.
So they put out a report, and they were they've done this in Germany. The CEO and the mayor is the same person, and he has quite a backroom staff to help run that side of thing. And then goes back to maybe the electoral college getting the right people in there. I don't know. Just it's the report that he's put out. The fella.
I think communities of interest are a fascinating thing because they're actually they're quite layered, I think. If you think about the community of interest around the Waitaki River, actually, the people in Waimate have a vested interest in that river, as does Mackenzie, particularly up the top end, and so does the white people in Waitaki. So do people in Timaru, because where do their Plymouth caravans head to? The Waitaki. So effectively, there is that by itself has got its own big community of interest. Then you could look at the other scale where, like, Geraldine here has got a big community of interest of its own right. So we're going to actually have to think hard about how do you navigate that and actually think about all different types of community of interests. You know, the farmers, they've got massive communities of interest right across the plains. And, you can't tell me that they're not a community. Of course they are. So we need to think that through.
I think that's actually the miss, though. I'd be doing about 20 citizenship ceremonies a year. Probably we often do a couple in a day to fit them in. But the importance of that is it's the Filipino workers that are coming out to the farms. It's really, really important to our communities, and it means so much to those people. And that will be actually a miss with this amalgamated version, because you simply cannot, do that. So you're going to have a different model, where, and it's quite bespoke, and it's quite nice for those people. You go to Christchurch, you're amongst a couple of hundred, you march through the door, say aye, job done, sort of thing. Whereas it's, a bit more meaningful. So there's a lot of things at a local level that we will lose through this, which is a shame.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It gets down to.
In the event of council amalgamation, as to how many councils will be involved in that amalgamation, what will actually happen to the distribution of the rates collected? In turn, might it drift north to help out another council that's in dire straits? And how much, or I dare say the guy with the ginger hair in Parliament is in on this ploy as well?
Chris.
You know who I mean?
Oh, sorry. I don't think he's in on.
Will you guys have, whoever's in there, will you have a say in your distribution of the rates gathered?
Yeah.
But you're not sure of that. And in a couple of years' time, you guys, all councils, not talking about you guys, might be in a different situation where these potholes here, you'll need to change gear to get out.
Yeah, look, I think that happens now. If you want to have an absolute purity in terms of where ratepayers' money is spent, then you wouldn't have rates at all. The whole point of rates is to gather money together from near and far and apply it to the problems that occur, and that'll still happen.
Yeah, but not necessarily spent on the right course.
Well, if you've got the right people in charge, it will be.
It comes back down to the democracy setup, doesn't it? If we've got the right people raising the right voices in the right areas in a robust fashion, then it's not such a big deal.
Yeah, so therefore you wouldn't want just one mayor covering a lot of area.
No.
But you would hope if it was being governed properly, like being run. Someone made a comment earlier about a business. You would hope it was done in the right areas. I mean, you can say the same about government. They collect money, and who says they spend it in the right areas?
I think you've got to go in with this, and we could put it all in buckets. And one of the lessons from a councillor I was talking to that was on one of the councils here in '89, he said that was one of the biggest mistakes we made, because it's really hard to untangle. So part of what you need to be doing is thinking 30 years out, and how is it going to be governed? And there will always be subsidy one way or another, whether it's health, and you'll be able to talk more to that. But a few years ago, we made the decision as a council to across footpaths for the Timaru districts. The footpaths were rated just by the community. So Geraldine had a footpath rate, Point, Temuka, Timaru. We did that all across. Who's the winners? It's the smaller communities win by having a bigger pool of footpath rate effectively. So yeah, I think we've just got to go with an open mind and very much think sort of 30, 50 years out. I know very early on, you know, I think the conversation was at, well, hey, you know, the Lions Club and you know, Temuka raised the money for that community barbecue. Well, the guys in Ashburton aren't coming for your community barbecue. That community barbecue is still going to be there. Maybe you've made some new friends and they'll come down and join you. But yeah, I think we've got to just come in with an open mind. And that's one of the things too. Well, we're coming and working together as councils. If we all bring a bottom line, we're not going to get anywhere. And so we've got to have a really open mind to how we work together. Because and high level principles, yes, but if we all have a bottom line, we're going to end up in the backstop.
And that's the sad thing. Like, we've really got to concentrate on the structure, because when you look at it now, they're not going to go away from capital value or land value. It's either going to be capital value or land value. You know, I mean, that would take a massive shift in government. But I mean, there is like 30% for annual. What do you call them? Annual charges and targeted rates. I mean, none of the councils around the country are right up at what they can do. I mean, the most of them around that 15, where under legislation now you can go up to 30% for targeted rates, but none of them do it. So we want to drive that in the structures so that those things are used more appropriately. So then the money is spent where it's needed, not where the council sitting on the table think it should be spent.
Okay.
One here first, we'll back to you next, Stephen.
I am concerned with a couple of things, and the first one is one figure that's not mentioned tonight is debt per ratepayer between the different councils, and I think Nigel, I think we should have had that figure up. Actually, it's quite important. The next one is we talk about getting away from ECAN all the time, and with good reason. But you know, we're now trying to create another big ECAN. It almost seems with the same thing, and hopefully without Christchurch, we might, as the driver, that may be better. But I think also there's some things to be sorted out between the various partners you're talking about, Ashburton, Geraldine, Ashburton, Oamaru, etc. And a classic case is the Lines Trust, or our electricity. We're trying to merge together. Ashburton, Oamaru own their own line trusts, paid significant dividends on it. They also have their own work scheme. Timaru has had a policy, I believe wrongly, of asset stripping and selling its infrastructure. That's going to cause problems to me. That we need to have a thing there, a clear policy where everybody's agreed on it. And I think that's one of the first things you guys have got to think about. You know, where do you stand on that? The other one is also, when it comes down to infrastructure and things, Ashburton does its own road repairs. Timaru farms it out. Waitaki as well, Fairley, etc. You know, we've got to really start thinking of some of these things, because at the moment we're running along. We've become a bugger's muddle, to be perfectly honest. And I'm also worried about our water. That we have Timaru establishing a community council-owned water scheme. Well, what's to stop them selling that off or whatever? You know, where's it going to start? Where's it going to end? We need a lot more surety of just where individuals' councils stand. And unless they're going to be united, then it's going to fall apart. And the other final one I'd say is that hopefully with a decent size region, we'd actually get proper political representation in our region and not split all over the bloody place. With one man doing Wanaka and all the rest of it, and part of Waitaki, and another one doing somewhere else. You know, we are big enough, and it's some time ago. And William, you were on Federated Farmers when it was drawn up. Then South Canterbury could have had 2 MPs. The only change was Dunedin North was going to become split between urban and rural. And the Labor government at the time wouldn't allow that to happen. And so we've ended up with this poor representation, I believe, in Wellington, or not as strong as it should be. But as I say, there's some things there. But I say certainly debt per ratepayer is quite significant.
You'll be happy to know, Jeremy, that yours will go down under the combined model from 6,500 to 4,500. you'll be happy to know under the combined model, your debt per head will go down from 6,500 to 4,500. So you'll be on a winner.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there was specifically a question, Jeremy, but one thing I think with the debt per ratepayer, you've also got commercial assets per ratepayer, and just to give some analysis of what sits in there, you've got Waitaki with Whitestone. You talk about is there an opportunity to bring in-house versus contract within that area. You've got Ashburton Contracting, you've got Whitestone, so there might be opportunities in there. So I think Waitaki has that company, they have forestry, Waimate have forestry, they have shares in Alpine, Timaru has port assets, has property portfolio, has the Alpine share, Mackenzie has forestry, Alpine share property, Ashburton has, I think, some forestry, Ashburton Contracting and property portfolio as well. So you can, there's trade-offs again, and there's so many differences when you're comparing to one council to another. It's not exact science. The water schemes currently are in legislation to protect, and I think there's opportunity in there across those models. There's currently 4, there's 2 in-house. We're working with Mackenzie and what's the other one? Waitaki is working in the southern waters. I would expect that government will look at that and go, hey, it makes sense to change those water schemes back to the appropriate new entities, and then you get that scale, and that's why we probably should have done this first. Yeah.
I think there are clever accountants who are going to sort that all out. I'm not, I think that's not the primary thing we should be thinking about. That's the secondary thing we should, that's just the mechanics of a merger. And those things, will get sorted out, and I assume they'll get it sorted out as fairly as possible. I think we need to be focusing on what we want in terms of what we'll be happy with in 30 years' time, when the whole change is all settled down and we're wanting to keep the system that we've got because we think it's so great.
Yeah.
We're talking about it, we don't know what's going to be good in 30 years. And it's quite a short time to have that consultation to figure that out. Yeah.
I agree, it's a short time.
Look, there is a short time, and I think we've got to be careful. We've been warned by MCERT, put your best foot forward, because you may not be able to change the boundary yet at that point. But it's not till sort of March, Mayish next year. So we've got 6 months for detailed design, and that's the opportunity to really get it right, to be talking with communities, to be talking with rural about how you build up that design. I actually don't think we do, in Timaru, 30,000 people, I think we can do better for democracy in that environment as well. I actually don't think we, do it well. Council generally is operating quite strategically. They don't have a community board. The things that matter are Christmas lights and the things that hold up the front page, whereas that's not the space that we spend any time. So I actually think we can do better in that space as well. So that's the opportunity, I think, is how you design it.
Yeah, Jimmy Emmett again. I've been to a few of these, and with my role in Feds, I've been open to a bit more information than others. And one thing that stands out to me is the structure of this thing should be key, not which boundary and which line on a map. It's about being able to work with other people and things like that. And at the very start, you said you were looking at the Tasman region and what they've achieved. What time frame have they been working under? How long have they been a unitary? And are there any lessons learnt so that we don't fall into the potential pitfalls?
I think 1992, I think they became unitaries. Tom, you might have better knowledge than I am, but I think that's about right. The 3 became unitaries about then. The reason why we're doing is that because we want to have faith that we can build it up as well as bringing it down, so we can have confidence that we can do all the functions that we need to. But I don't think we're there yet. We're going to get as much as we can by the 9th, but it's not going to be perfect. And we just don't have enough time. I'll be open and honest. We do not have enough time to do our full due diligence. If you did this properly, you'd probably do it over a 3-year period. Or, Auckland was about 10 years. So it is rushed. We all know that. However, where there's a will, we need to.
The three unitaries at the top of the South Island do work a lot together. So I know that, because Nelson and Tasman does a lot of work for Nelson, and same with Marlborough. So I think as part of that design, we do need to sit with them and understand exactly what you're saying. What are the pitfalls and what are the pluses?
I think the thing, Jimmy, your point about structure is, and I said to these guys on Tuesday night, we've got to have real strong leadership about pushing back if we're not happy with where we're getting forced. And the only way they can have strong leadership is if the community gets behind them. If we're not happy with the way government says this is what you're going to do, you don't necessarily have to do it. That's not the way democracies work. And if there's a big enough voice behind this, the leadership these guys, councillors, are doing, they will back off because they're all scared about getting kicked out of government. It's as simple as that. So you've got to think that way. If we get the structure right that you want, not what they want.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for coming along, the panel especially. I just have one comment on that to the panel is that since Timaru, Pleasant Point and Temuka aren't really interested, you should just continue to come out here and talk to us. Clearly we are vocal and that we definitely want to have a say. My take from this is, let's face it, the reality is councils are failing, and that's a recognition that the central government's telling us anyway, and that's why they're forcing amalgamation upon us. I think everything that's talked about tonight, most of it, there's a lot of it can be worked out, boundaries, finances and all the rest of it, I agree, but it takes a lot of thrashing around. But the biggest problem I see here, and I'm pretty sure this community will agree, is going to be the lack of representation. And that one really concerns me. So I'd like to know in that model, how on earth we are going to have enough representation. You're talking about, if you take up those 5 councils, we then have 1 mayor and 10 councillors. Is that correct, roughly? How on earth is our voice going to be heard? And there's going to be so many communities who will just be cut out from that. I don't know. You're talking there'll be no community boards. There'll be no representation. So that for me is the biggest concern. I think everything else here tonight could be worked out. I tend to agree. I'd prefer just the 3 council option to me, not the 5, but I don't think there will be an option from what I've read and what I've said. So my question there is, how much say will you as councils have into that? Or is this model or modelling saying you have to have far less people? And how do we listen to the communities of interest, i.e. the Geraldines and there's so many of them, it's not funny. So that's my question, thanks.
Yeah, so I mean, currently, this is the conundrum, is hit the nail on the head. This is the one we have to nail. And there's our community boards and the Mackenzie community boards have come together and they're working on, a submission back to our proposals on, what that could look like. And I don't have all the answers at the moment. You've got about 98 elected members across those 5 councils now, about 40 roughly councillors. So you're going to end up with, why I personally believe, about 12's enough, and you can go wider and wider. You could go to 20 or 30 and then you would get a councillor from Geraldine. It's just not practical to manage that. Herding 9 councillors, no offence to Philip or any of the others in here. Philip's great, by the way, actually, you picked well. It's hard. It's hard managing, a council like that. But there are models. We just have to think differently. Maybe you might not have a representative, but around that council table, you have one person and they have to look after this community of interest. Sitting underneath that, and there again, it's not for me to design that, but, could it be a local board that looks after more urban, and could it be more of a local board that has a rural focus across Temuka, Point, Geraldine as an example? And then what does representation look on that community, that local board, because there could have the opportunity, I think, in the lesson from Auckland is probably they had too many local boards, but also the delegations weren't right. So community boards within our model currently are largely advocacy. They've got small budgets, they've got small local budget and small council budget. The cost, in all reality, per community board is probably a couple of $100,000 to keep it going with democracy and then staffing. But I think there is a model. There's some. There's a lot of good thinking happening, and I think we can land on something. So actually, within that rural local board, you might still have a couple of people, and actually they're making bigger decisions than currently the community boards making now. So I think if we put our heads together, we can probably come up with something. Yeah.
I think there are overseas models that we could look at, and I do agree with the Mayor that you've got to get the structure right, and you've also got to get the delegations right. And I know that, like sort of Waimate, is forefront of their mind as well in terms of what does it look like, and I also know that that's the same in Waitaki. So all the meetings have got that right in the right in the forefront to say, how do we do this? And I think that would be the same for all 5 districts, and therefore I think there's a great opportunity there to come up with something that actually works.
As I said before, making local government simpler just by making, one council do all of the, make all of the decisions is probably not the right way to go, in my view. So I think that if you had a structure that was, well, first of all, should the mayor be the chairman of the board? Should we have one mayor for this entire district? To me, that seems like they're going to get, not that the mayor's going to be lost, but we'll lose the mayor in the size of the thing, and particularly you lose your local communities of interest, because you start to lose your identity. And I think Geraldine, the fact that so many people have turned up in Geraldine tonight is perhaps a reflection that they felt that they lost some of their identity when we had the last round of amalgamations. So I think there's probably a core set of functions that start at the top and go to community board type of organisations or sub-organisations. But there are other functions that I think we shouldn't try and cram into that simple model. And catchment groups is one of those that I mentioned. Roading is probably another. But looking after the library and things that are really local to the community might be able to be put together. So again, I just think we're thinking of this model just as, well, we had 700 councils or whatever it was 30 years ago. Now we've got 79, and now we're going to go to 20, and we're just going to do the same thing bigger. And I think we shouldn't do that. We should really try and think outside the square about how we're going to organise this.
The only opportunity, though, if you've only got 20 mayors, you've probably got less mayors than cabinet ministers. There's something in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
Thank you. I agree that the overall concept is empowering and looks attractive, and particularly in terms of bringing the regional council functions back to more practical local level, and I see some real advantages in that. But the devil's always in the detail, isn't it? And I think when you start looking at how the structural arrangements that flow from this is the important part of it. And the last part of the discussion, which is about bringing back services to local, is the important bit. It's all very well to talk about representation, but I think it's just as important to talk about the services that are available. And while it's great to talk to your councillor about a pothole, it's more important that the man from Peel Forest or the woman from Peel Forest can talk to a person in the council to get things done. And that connection and that local contact is really an important part of designing this model. most mergers fail through lack of execution and empowering, bringing the power to the hierarchy, a hierarchy type arrangement. Whereas if you can design a system that's flat and gives people influence back at local level, then you're going to feel much more comfortable, and the model is going to work better because you've got people you can talk to that gets things done. Most CEOs in a merger want to bring things back centralised, bring them back to the head office. I'm arguing for a collaborative, very flat model would be the one that may work and may be more politically acceptable.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you about a flat model. I think that's a really good idea, but I just don't think we should do the same thing, just bigger, which I think is probably what you're also saying.
I have to agree with that. When I was CEO of the District Health Board, I took an entire layer out and flattened that structure, and that place just operated beautifully because people were empowered to actually get on with things. Trying to do the same at Timaru District Council. Slightly different beast, but we're getting there.
Yeah, hi. I think this thing's coming down the highway whether we like it or not, and we've just got to get stuck in and do the best job we can with what could either be a success or a god-awful mess. But with the local representation issue, I understand the problem, and it can be managed through committees and bits and pieces that can make supposedly decisions for their own sphere of influence or the function they're created to look after. But when it comes to the pinch point that exists in this world of governance and operational separation, how the hell are you going to design something that will get the policy settings and all the bits and pieces that go with that, that the elected representatives are actually accountable to their people for, and drive it back into the organisation so that they'll bloody well do it, instead of putting up the bureaucratic walls that are often put up? How do you destroy that culture? Because I've got to tell you, the Timaru District Council culture is not great. And how do you create a customer service focus in an organisation? You've got an extraordinary opportunity to perhaps do that now. And it's all going to be about the design. The structure is going to be absolutely key to this thing. And I'm a little bit terrified to think that, having worked for some of them, that you'll get one of the big name consultancies in to do the thought that's going to be necessary around this project and to get the design right. Because you don't want McKinsey coming in and giving you the slide set number 34B. And you don't want a lot of the stuff that comes out of the PwCs, etc. And I've worked for them, I know what goes on. This is going to have to be very carefully thought through with people that understand the issues and are clever enough to figure some of this stuff out. And it terrifies me that we're not going to get that right.
Yeah, and I think just to briefly comment, and I 100% agree, you've got 5 councils that'll be different, that'll be good at different things. So you'll be able to bring that to the table. Also my view, and only one player in amongst others, is that within about a year, assuming government have signed off what our detailed design looks like, at that point you're probably going to the market for your transitional CE, and you'll build that in-house team very early on, so you don't have that reliance. And I would expect too that you're going to attract some pretty good people for some of those roles, because it's relatively, I would imagine it's relatively enticing when you go from 78 councils to 20, and there'll be people from overseas looking at those roles, and there'll be people from other sectors as well. So I think it's quite an exciting opportunity in that regard. But I agree with your comments.
I think your comments were actually excellent. I mean, my comment at the start about trying to restore confidence, I mean, I hear it all around New Zealand, and I mean, it's interesting, and I know the world's changed, but that bureaucratic wall has just become untenable. I mean, some of you know my father was mayor on the Mackenzie District Council for years, and he used to always talk about how when they had a meeting on the the monthly meeting, there was a list on the table from a job that needed doing, and they'd say to the staff, "Why isn't this done?" There was accountability about why it wasn't done, but we've lost that accountability for some reason, and I'm not sure how it's happened. These guys might disagree with me, but the fact is, you hear from everyone in the community now, you can't go and get something done that you want done in timely manner, and that's part of the structure we've got to get definitely right, or else the confidence won't come back.
I think that's the opportunity as well. I mean, that really is where we're at, is we've got a really good opportunity to build something that works for everybody. And maybe that is decentralizing some of that nuts and bolts stuff down to your community boards and your catchment board type things, and taking some of the pressure off, because, in Nigel's defence, and it's unusual for me to defend someone in council, but anyway, when they've got everything on their plate, from strategy down to Christmas lights, the Christmas lights are at the bottom of the list, but they mean a lot often to our community. And it's probably being a bit facetious, but it is what it is, and that's where we've got this opportunity to really get a hold of it. And as you said before, if we don't like it, we've got to push back and keep coming to these meetings and keep listening and keep talking, because this is our chance to be involved.
Good point, Engine. Put your feedback in with the insert from the courier. There's copies at the library, so get the feedback in. Question over here.
Kia ora, I'll just come round the pillar here. My question for you is, there wasn't an option with South Canterbury plus the Waitaki. I was just curious why, we've got one South Canterbury plus Ashburton, but not South Canterbury plus Waitaki.
Yeah, look, we went through lots of iterations on why, and I'm not sure whether at the time, those decisions were made some time ago, whether there was some influence from what was happening in Waitaki at the time, to be, open and honest, but also around the population metric. So 50 here, we get to 63 with the 3 South Canterbury councils. We get to 100 straight away with Ashburton, and then you've got about another 23,000 in Waitaki. So partly that's scale as well. And I think we're very much waiting. Waitaki's in an interesting situation. They cross 2 boundaries. They've got 1 litre boxes, Crusaders, and on the other side of the street, it's something else. So, I think it's good that they're pointing our way, one for that catchment, and also because I think, to Greg's point, we're all sort of rural, service areas, out sort of a bit more manufacturing and port in Timaru, but otherwise we're exactly the same, and it does make sense. But yeah, for those reasons probably.
Yeah, I think, having looked at that paper, the Waitaki, their sense of identity is probably heads south more than north. I mean, I don't know how you're going to get the guy at the bottom of the Linders Pass to change his grain silo from blue and yellow to red and black. You'll know you've won when that happens. But but yeah, so it was a matter of prioritising the combinations, and that just came down the list, I think, because of that. Yeah.
And we have been watching the other councils pretty closely through this. I've watched so many council meetings now because they're exciting to watch, aren't they? But it came clear that they were rural provincial. That was one thing, and they wanted to keep Oamaru with that catchment. And we sort of listened to that and thought, well, actually, that's pretty okay. And they did make the joke that you've got 3 councils, Waitaki, Mackenzie, and Waimate, all invested in the catchment, and for some reason Timaru, 80 kilometres away, was claiming it as well. So
in one of your letters and your submissions, something I read that what was it, the Wahimo
down
board
the bottom
should have been gone south in 89, but it didn't. It got chucked in this way. So maybe just get rid of that bottom half. And
well, Nigel, you would have been able to if you'd supported Hunter Downs. Sorry, I had to get that in.
Can I tell you just how fundamental it is that those communities of interest, you dare not ignore them. Some years ago, I did a job for the New Zealand Rugby Union up and down the country. And one of the things that I was tripped over was, because I didn't live here at that stage, I came down here and I was speaking to the local unions about some issues and bits and pieces, and I couldn't understand why the North Otago Union didn't combine the competition with South Canterbury and Mid Canterbury because they were all struggling for numbers and all the rest of it. No one this side of the river could tell me. When I got down to North Otago and I was talking to a guy who was a wise old farmer up 7 Mile Road, I think, from memory, and he said, oh, it's really simple. He said, on this side of the river, we're Scottish. On that side, the bastards are English. And that was fundamental to me. Once I realised how ingrained those sorts of attitudes were, it changed my whole attitude when I did some other jobs about merging some bits and pieces and all the rest of it. If you lose sight of those interests and don't cater for them, you will just have resistance and things will not rub along.
Now it's time to have a question from Tom Lambie.
Very early on, we did put to Canterbury, it was the mayors and CEs, and I said, put up your hand if you're Catholic. Yeah. So we had a majority of Catholics, and so we could have divided Canterbury across Catholics and Anglicans, it would have been at the time. We possibly would have got a similar sort of outcome.
Stephen, have we got any online that they're all here tonight?
Yeah.
Any other questions from out on the floor there?
It's not really a question, it's more of a comment. Even going back to this though, right to the beginning, we have why is it happening? We've used the words, or the government's used the word simpler and simplification. If that is a point of measurement, it's going to be the easiest thing in the world to do, and it will lose the soul of everything because you strip costs, you strip it down, you end up with it being smaller and smaller. If the words were effective and effectiveness, that actually sets us up to look at things really differently. Yeah. Well, I think we're talking effectiveness. I think the government is talking simplification. And one is about cutting costs, and the other one is about doing a better job.
Here, here.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah, good comment. Thank you for that. Any other questions out there? We're getting close to wrap-up time. Maybe I could ask the panellists to give the audience their opinion on how they would like to see things pan out. Will you?
Oh, I'm going to go last because I went first last time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How would you like to see things pan out?
Oh, look, I've been constantly harping away in the background with the Mayoral Forum that there's a golden opportunity to redesign our part of the local government, and we've really got to take that opportunity and do it well. Yes, we're under time constraints, but I actually think the first one we send out on the 9th of August is a sales pitch, because we know the Cabinet will read the executive summary, and if that's written really well, then we're on our way. And then the design is in the next 6 months to actually get something really well designed.
Yeah, look, and there's things that we haven't talked about today. Timaru District leans north for policing, a few other things. We lean south for a lot of our other services as far as government, etc. And if you start to look at the opportunity for that wider area to be, called a region and recognised as such to central government, how do we build other services into the future within that region to better serve our community? So I think this is the first step on, and that's, I think, to the point, just made. Yes, government's focused on these things at the moment, but, it's a structure that we build, I think, that can serve other elements within the community. I think there's an opportunity that sits in there. I don't have all the answers, but I just go back to the fact, hey, it's not working, and we could be working together, but we don't. And it's taken this reform to make us have those conversations. And we could be doing better. We could be doing services together that would genuinely save ratepayers money, but we don't because we're parochial. So we have to get past that. And we actually all have to raise ourselves up to that helicopter view. And it's hard. I get that, just because I'm end up, being a ratepayer within a council of a bigger area doesn't mean that I wasn't born in, Jean Todd and and played for Celtic. Actually, I played in a North Otago and South Canterbury competition, funny enough. So, that doesn't take your identity away. This is more around how we deliver those services. Just want to put up what's the feeling in the room for a Hannon Shields Council? Is that something? You go for it, mate.
We could go back and call it Strathallan. I think I've said enough tonight, but it's really important that we just stay engaged, because apathy is what kills democracy, especially local democracy. And as I said on Tuesday night, there's not enough people here we'll lower the age bit, under 30. 50 the other night and I got in trouble. Jimmy, you still under 50? So, we've got to somehow talk to your children, because this is what it's going to affect them, not us. So, we've got to get the young people engaged too.
Luckily, I'm 29. Thanks. Yeah, look, I'm just stoked to see how many Geraldine people have turned up here, and how invested we all are in our community. And I think that's a really good starting point. And I want to see us keep invested and keep. I haven't got the answers on behalf of Geraldine, even though I'm sitting here. But I really am always here if anybody wants to come and have a chat about it. On Geraldine NZ, we've got Philip Harper sitting on our board, so we're always talking with him. And look, it is a bit exactly what Greg just said. If we're not at the table, we're on the menu. So don't let that be us. Yeah.
I think the perfect outcome, and if we do end up amalgamating with North Otago, then we won't have to argue about where Richie McCaw came from. But I think I just come back to what I said at the beginning, and that is, if we can, a good outcome for me is that the new entity is effective, and that communities retain their sense of community and have the representation that they need. And those are actually two quite different and almost competing things. But I think it is possible if we really think about it and think outside the square rather than just repeating the same old model. So that's what I think a good outcome would be.
Thank you very much for your feedback there from the panel. Just a reminder, guys, that submit your feedback via what the insert was in the courier or online, or you can get copies at the service centre. I think it's really important to have your say. I know a lot of people have already done it. I think we've got till next week, end of next week, to put it in. So, yeah, get stuck in and have your say. I would, sincerely like to thank the panel. William, appreciate your experience and input tonight. Ange roped in at late notice, off the bench.
Hadn't even made it to the bench.
Had a great day. Greg, travelled a long way to get here. Appreciate your input. Been around the area for a long time, so thank you very much. And the two Nigels, appreciate there's a hell of a lot going on at council at the moment. Lots happening. So, yeah, thank you very much. And to the Geraldine residents, you're fabulous. Make my job easy. The question's wrong. You're awesome. You get out there and have your say. So, thank you very much. Have a safe trip home. All the best.